Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
The Reflex-Man in Whinnymuir Close by Russell Kirk. They call this Reflex-Man a coimach or co-worker, every way like the man as a twin brother and companion, haunting him as to his shadow, and is oft seen and known among men, resembling the original, both before and after the original is dead, and was else often seen of old to enter a house, by which the people knew that a person of that likeness was to visit them within a few days. This copy, echo, or living picture goes at last to his own herd. The Reverend Robert Kirk, M.A., in the Secret Commonwealth. Editor's note. The following relation was discovered in a padlocked chest, covered over by an accumulation of rubbish at the top of an ancient house in the High Street of Pittenweem. Together with other papers of less surviving interest, this curious manuscript was concealed within tied bundles of 18th century apparel. The pages of this memoir, severely damaged by damp and in part illegible, are closely written upon in a neat but infirm hand, presumably by a person of advanced years. The manuscript now is deposited in the library of the University of St Andrews, where it may be examined only with the express permission of Drumcarrow Estates Limited, and of the librarian, or, in his absence, of the Vice-Chancellor. The editor has reason to believe that this peculiar document never reached the eyes of members of the Fife family of the Inchburns of Drumcarrow, although it appears to have been written to instruct them. In the end, conceivably, the author of this memoir determined to let the dead bury the dead. In some instances, the spelling and the punctuation of this narrative, here printed for the first time, have been altered slightly in conformity to present usage. The manuscript is undated, although internal evidence sufficiently establishes the approximate dates of the events referred to, and is unsigned. R.K. They have said, and they will say, let them be saying, there having circulated among the vulgar and the credulous some perverted tale of what passed within Whinnymuir Close and the house when Lord Bamford came to his latter end, this veracious record is set down by the palsied hand of one beseeching the author of our being for mercy. The faggots in the Market Square and the stake at Tidemark on the beach are bygone things now. Yet the Lord's vengeance does not sleep. Commence we with some account of Geoffrey, called of courtesy Lord Bamford, being eldest son to Lord Solway, that title today lying dormant at the decree of divine providence. Finding himself deeply indebted to the London usurers, this young lord took up his residence for some months in Edinburgh. The Earls of Solway held neglected properties in the Lowlands, as well as their principal estates in Lancashire and Cumberland. Among those Scots properties was Whinnymuir House, the muckle ancient dwelling in the close of that name, betwixt the Cowgate and High Street. The principal rooms having been plenished tolerably for his coming, Lord Bamford lodged himself therein. Young and open-handed, and a pretty man enough, Lord Bamford proceeded to spy out the nakedness of his father Scott's estates and of Edinburgh's women. Now it chanced that there dwelt at a land in the Lawn Market that midsummer a young woman called Janet Kenley, daughter to a clockmaker at Pittenweem. She, having been schooled by governesses and tutors beyond her station and her sex, and being puffed up with pride at her father's goods and chattels, did make herself no little of a coquette, though chaste. Her eyes and her ankles, she discovered, were approved by the young gallants of Edinburgh, as they had been by the fisher lads of Pittenweem, and thereby came she to her public disgrace, and to her soul's peril. Matthew Kenley, her father, made tall clocks in Pittenweem High Street, and of them some were sold overseas in the Low Countries. Yet his prosperity had more cause than that. His siller notwithstanding, he dwelt still in a small freehold house on the Market Square. The truth of the matter was this. His house lay at the head of a serpentine wind called the Gailey, winding up from a wee slip or landing place among the reefs without Pittenweem's harbour. The tide being at flood, boats might run of nights into this narrow haven, and land what the gorges would have levied duty upon. In the back wall of Matthew Kenley's dwelling was a round hole, closed by a shutter inwardly, and into this sloping bit tunnel, passing through the thickness of the bealdy wall of rubble, some seaman trotting up the Gailey might slide what he listed. Should the gougers follow in pursuit, still they might not enter Matthew's dwelling without showing a warrant. When, after some hours, such a warrant might be issued, no contraband would be found in the house, byre or close. Thus Matthew Kenley now and anon walked in dark ways, laying up treasure here below. Of his near acquaintance was that Wilson, hanged by Captain Porteus in the Grassmarket, when Janet Kenley was just but 16. Had Matthew Kenley been a man of probity, he might not have wedded the wife he did, Agnes Doubtfire, for she, like her mother before her, stood suspect as being a wise woman, acquainted with simples and other concerns less simple. Agnes departed this life, having not attained 30 years. Matthew then bethought him, out of pride, through which fault fell the angels, to make a lady out of his bit daughter Janet. Upon smuggling were her pretensions founded. Agnes had borne Matthew a son, Dugald, the year after being brought to bed with Janet. This Dugald, poor lad, was tall and strong, but feckless and wild of eye. Some called him loon, dolt, and daft chiel. Brave garments and his sister were all his loves. The father spoilt the twain. Now, Matthew Kenley, perishing suddenly of a fever from the West Indies, his wilful daughter found Pittenweem too petty a stage for her show. In name, her protectress was an aged aunt, Rachel Kenley, with but a moiety of her wits about her. To Edinburgh Janet bore both aunt and brother, taking a floor of a land in the Lawn Market, its rent no consideration for this impudent baggage. Once in sight of St. Giles's lantern, brother Dugald, loved by Janet as he loved her, set up for a gentleman of fashion, filling the pockets of tailors and tobacconists and sweetmeats makers. Aunt and sister grudged him no expense, he being denied by Providence a full portion of prudence. Before a month was out, Dugald fell in with Lord Banford and his comus rout of besotted English and Scottish sprigs. At card and at dice they fleeced the innocent, night upon night, smirking, and aunt and sister paid his losses. Yet one uncorrupt acquaintance did Dugald chance to make, and that a grizzled bonnet laird twice his years and more. Edinburgh wits thought Colonel Ian Inchburn of Drumcarrow near so fey as Dugald himself. Drumcarrow being an ill man to deal with and sharp of hearing, what they said of him was whispered behind closed doors. There did some of the sprigs, greatly daring, venture to call him the Barbary Ape. In truth, Colonel Inchburn, back from years in East India, was no petty man. Like his father before him, he was short of leg and long of arm. Over his forehead his thick red hair, shot with grey, descended nigh to his brows, which were huge and beetling as some beasts'. He was given to walking with his shoulders inclined somewhat forward, a posture, it was said, become natural to him from bending over his horse's neck while leading the charge of a squadron of sowars. Nearly always he dressed in rusty black, his garments huddled on. For all the roughness of the outer man, his voice was melodious, and his speech that of the universities. In his youth, Ian Inchburn had been sent to St. Mary's College, St. Andrews, to be schooled for a minister, or failing that, a dominie. At the stony, high-lying family property of Drumcarrow, overlooking both the shores of Fife and the How of Fife, the very roof of the Dewcot was fallen away. The two farms would not sustain the boy laird's widowed mother, let alone Ian. His Greek, his Latin, his Bible he mastered well. He was graduated. But for this young scholar, no parish was found. Like enough the cause was his perilous inclining toward the damnable error denominated by some pillars of the Kirk as Gregorianism. Now and again he was overheard chanting in solitude, perhaps in malice, he being wondrous witty when young. When old, some voice or other of a like-wake dirge he would sing out, "This een nicht, every nicht and Allah, fire and sleet and candle licht, and Christ receives thy soul." Then, anon, "From Brigadreed, when thou mayst pass, every nicht and Allah, to purgatory fire thou comest at last, and Christ receive thy soul." For such hints of popish inclination was he twice summoned before a Kirk session and reproved sternly. Perceiving at length that no parish would have him for minister or even dominie, young Drumcarrow, obtaining the commendation of the Earl of Balcarres and other Fife worthies, was given an East India cadetcy, and out he went to Calcutta. In later years, intimates would call him in jest Colonel the Reverend Ian Inchburn of Drumcarrow, M.A., nor would he rebuke them. It may be pardoned in Drumcarrow that he wore his learning on his sword knot, he being given to theological disputation, and not loath to parade his Latin and his Greek. In Bengal he mastered other tongues, and made no slight acquaintance with other faiths than the Reformed. To a brother officer, Drumcarrow confided once that the blackamoor minions of Lucifer were twice or thrice more subtle than Satan's Scots limbs. This Colonel Inchburn had been lodging for some months in a decayed, commodious house in the Cowgate, said once to have been Mary of Guise's. Having come back from Calcutta, men thought empty of pocket, as when he had gone out there those many years before. Inchburn of Drumcarrow seemingly had found his fortune at a stay. Despite that, he kept about him in the Cowgate a crew of half-pay captains and lieutenants poorer than himself, sustaining them on watered porridge and thin claret, and regaling them with his tales of Indian marches, fatal encounters, sieges, sacks, and forlorn hopes. This battered laird of Drumcarrow was a douce man enough, with the thinness of his claret assisting him in that. Many a time he conversed with the professors of the university, hoping always to confute their pedantry. With women he consorted not at all. Although, knowing her brother, in the streets he would doff his hat to Janet Kenley, sending a keen glance at her from the sea caves of his een, to which usage from gentlemen and the vulgar she was not unaccustomed. More than once Colonel Inchburn, M.A., spoke a word of counsel to Dugald Kenley, telling the lad to have an eye to the company he kept. Yet Dugald, pleased though he was by the notable soldier's notice, found the riot and ribaldry of Lord Banford's troop more lively by far, so that the hard siller ran through his fingers like quicksilver. The son of the clock-making smuggler fancied himself a gentleman, light and debonair, favoured of a peer's son. Just so did his sister Janet, admiring her reflection in the glass, ask, like some princess, "Who is the fairest of us all?" Perhaps she grew fond enough to think herself fit for some lord's bride, and the portion left to her by her father a grand dowry. She took to rouge and a beauty patch. Of afternoons, not infrequently, the brothers' boon comrades would stroll to the lawn market to drink a dish of tea with the lad's sister. Lord Banford praised her polite learning, so rare in a lass, her voice, her hand upon the virginal, and much else beside, not forgetting her black eyes, whose power other young men had remarked. He was infamous in Edinburgh for a rake, but many a chaste woman aspires to entice a rake into the ranks of the godly. Far from displeased at these kind attentions, Janet Kenley concerted plans for an evening's rout for her brother's friends at her Lawn Market lodgings, sparing no expense for food, drink, and candles. Doddering Auntie did not demur, while Dugald was pleased as any bairn. The sister, wise after her mother's fashion, the brother, half a man only. These twain never uttered a hard word one to the other, guessing without speech one the other's wishes, as if their souls were entwined. Both were fey somewhat, he in his way, she in hers. Never had they been parted many hours, and when on occasion Dugald gamed long with Banford's set in Whinnymuir house, still Janet might fancy she glimpsed his form in the Lawn Market kitchen, or heard his tread on the Lawn Market stair. In her mind's eye, be it said, she beheld him always, as one gifted with the second sight. On the evening appointed, a score and more of guests clattered up the turnpike stair, 5 stories, to Princess Janet's palace. There came but 3 other ladies, or what passed for ladies, rouged and powdered like Paris hussies, bold of glance and attire, smiling one at another when presented to their hostess. There came also, half carried up the stair, a gouty old sardonic Scots baronet, Sir Angus Kinkle, who had once commanded a frigate in India waters. He had been at the university with Lord Solway when Solway had been Banford himself, and Solway had asked Sir Angus to keep some rein upon young Lord Banford, otherwise given his head in Edinburgh. What with the fashion the baronet looked upon her, Janet doubted Sir Angus's propriety as a Spriggs mentor. The saucy Janet sang to her guests and played upon her virginal, and if they did not hearken over keenly, look at her they did, until she blushed crimson. There was playing at whist, and overmuch of drinking of wines and smuggled brandy. Auntie had been bundled into her closet. Poor Dugald, lurching about the whist tables, was 2/3 bemused by strong spirit. The ladies' voices rose shrill, and the gentlemen's talk was slurred and sprinkled with oaths. Proud Janet well might ask herself if conversations went thus in the salon of Paris. While she hesitated in the middle of the chief room, perplexed as to whether she should tell the 2 serving women to fetch more brandy, there approached her closely Lord Banford, heaping compliments upon her and begging a word in private. He seemed to restrain as best he might some strong sentiment. Of her own charms Janet doubted not, and even to an English lord she fancied the portion her father had bequeathed to her might not be unacceptable. She lowered her ashes demurely. There being few rooms on a Lawn Market land's floor, she ushered her noble guest into her own small chamber, nearly filled by the bed her father had bought her from a Dutch skipper, and the muckle armoire from Brittany that held her gowns, and the shelf with her books. With a slight bow to her, Banford closed the door behind him, his face much flushed. Says he, "I've a question to put to you, madam." The notion flitted through her foolish head that she might become Lady Banford that very year, and the Countess of Solway in the Lord's good time. Yet that was not the question Banford put to her. She gasped and flared up. Taking her in his grip, Banford poured into her ear words, nay, foul fooleries, that never Janet had heard from any man before. He muttered snatches of verse, tugging at her new orange bodice. What was he saying? Was it not Shakespeare? Then give me leave to stroke thy boobies, as they gently rise and fall. Just that, her protests and struggles not availing, Lord Banford proceeded to do. Frantic, she scratched him across his grinning face. He thrust the silly quean back upon her bed. It came to Janet then that this accomplished rake meant to have her maidenhead instanter. She shrieked so loudly and earnestly as ever she might. Such was the subtle bond of spirit betwixt sister and brother that Dugald, for all the brandy he had swallowed, at once heard his sister's cry and was sobered. Banford had latched the door. Dugald flung his weight upon it, burst it open, beheld his sister much disarrayed in his noble friend's clutch, and took hard hold of Banford. In this stramash, Lord Banford's wig fell to the floor, disclosing a scalp which, for all its youth, was nigh hairless. Grasping Banford by the back of his collar, Dugald played Hercules to Banford's Cacus. Banford's drunken friends taking the stramash for rough frolic. He thrust the young nobleman out upon the common stair, trundled him downwards 2 or 3 stories, and flung him, bruised and almost senseless, upon the stones. That done, Dugald returned, panting and wrathful, to his sister's side. By this time, some of Lord Banford's friends had commenced to take a second view of the wrestling on the stair, so that it might have gone hard with Dugald. Yet Sir Angus Kinkle, laughing and puffing, quieted them as best he might. Brawling was sufficiently common at Edinburgh routs, then, even more than nowadays. It was not often that a tradesman's son cuffed and buffeted a peer's son, true, and flung him down the stair. Sir Angus, blessed as a peacemaker, nevertheless urged his companions down to the street, picking up Banford in the course of their drunken progress. Lord Banford's curses echoed up to Janet, he yelling like a fiend from the pit. Sir Angus limped out at last. Says he to Dugald, "Have a care o' Lord Banford now, ye brute, ye daft carl. Aye, and take a care for your black-eyed sister." Sir Angus looked Janet up and down, she endeavouring like some surprised nymph to cover herself. "Why, lass," Sir Angus says to her, "what else expected ye, my word? But I do take ye for innocent, sister and brother, mare's the wonder. Get ye to a nunnery, lass. Ye'll ne'er mak a court lady." As Sir Angus groped his way heavily down the dark stair, grunting now and again as he bumped his gouty foot, Janet heard her fancied suitor, Lord Banford, shouting down below. "Diana at her bath," screams he, "with her bedlam brother for her faithful hound. I'll have that tormenting Scots witch. I'll flog that stubborn prude like a bitch in my kennel." Then their manservants shot home the bolts in their oaken door, and the words from below could not be made out. Lord Banford's trampled wig lay disconsolate at Janet's feet. Here a page of the manuscript is so rotted by damp that no word can be deciphered. We resume with the following page, less damaged. Ed. As later Sir Angus related it to the Procurator Fiscal, their talk went much as follows. Sir Angus. "What, call out the daft lad? He'd meet ye, Banford, with joyful alacrity, to cross swords with a peer's son, being a patent of gentility. Then ye'd kill him, and find it weel to flit to France, or else be hangit in the grass market, earl's son or no. Or should ye but run him through once or twice in parts not vital, ye'd mak yoursel the toon's laughing stock for months on end. What? Play a duello with a smuggler's half-wit get, because he mislikes your pinch and his sister's boobies? No, Banford. Ye better paint yourself blue, tak cap and bells, and prance naked round Holyrood. 'Twould be less absurd." Lord Banford. "Damn you, Kinkle. I'll make that young witch with the black eyes do the prancing. Either her brother will pay me out, or she must." "Why say witch, lad? Did she enchant ye? Have ye knowledge of all they say in Pittenweem? Put not thy trust in witches, Banford, nor know them carnally. In a corner of Pittenweem kirkyard they burnt their witches once, but that fashion's o'er. I knew the tarry winds of Pittenweem whale, and the women folk thereof, when I was a beardless midshipman. But what's this of Pittenweem? The burg's a nest of trolls and witches, you mean?" "Not long after I came into my majority, a mob of sailors and fishers there did to death one Janet Cornfoot, accused by a dirty tinker of having sent him into fits. They stoned the old carlin, swung her on a rope twixt ship and shore, and at the end pressed the life out of her under a door under the strand. She had gossips. Curse you, Kinkle, what's all this history to me? One of her gossips was a Mistress Doubtfire, grandame to your darling Janet. She lay under a cloud for what few more years she spent here below. And her daughter Agnes, too, your light-o'-love's mother, was said to sell simples and to be endowed with a second sight. Then that teasing quain Janet's the devil's dam as well. By God, I'll have her before the magistrates for casting her spell on me. Time was when you might have done so, my lord, but 'tis late in the day for that. 14 years gone, Sheriff Ross burnt an old hag in Sutherland for a witch, but he'd no jurisdiction, and there was talk of trying him for murder. No, no, lad, there may be witches still, yet they're burnt, no drowned, no longer in our degenerate age. You'll no warm your roving hands at Janet's bonfire. Mark me, Kinkle, I'll see she's made hot enough for all that. She'll pay on her bum for the tossing her lamp of a brother gave me. Come now, Banford. Your father found willing wenches enough for his pleasure short of vexing clockmakers' witch daughters. Here occurs another hiatus in the damaged manuscript. The narrative then resumes somewhat abruptly. On the Thursday, a caddy brought to their lodging a line for Dugald from Mr. Robert Macpherson, asking him to whist near the Lucken booths, and happy was Dugald at that invitation for the next evening, he having been forlorn since parted finally from his old companions at Whinnymuir Close. Not an hour later, another caddy came to the Lawn Market, bearing a card from old Lady Christie, hard by George Heriot's school, and Janet, sequestered since the rout that ended in Stramash, found herself asked to hear Lady Christie's niece play upon the spinet, by good fortune at the very hour Dugald would be with Macpherson and his friends. Accordingly, on the Friday, as the dark settled upon the town, sister and brother went their separate ways, Janet in a sedan chair, for being now an Edinburgh lady, she would not think of going barefoot on the causeway, as once she had done with the other lasses of Pit and Weem. Her shy bit maid trotted behind her chair. The chairmen were stout Highland gillies, not favoured of feature, sparing of speech. She had not seen them before. On reaching the foot of Candlemaker's Row, Miss Kenley found Lady Christie's lodging quite dark. Pound the door though the Highland men did, they roused none within. The old lady, not over-strong of intellect, must have set down the wrong night on her card, said the maid to Janet. The Princess of Pit and Weem bade the chairmen bear her home again. Thinking on her brother's bold defence of her the week gone, Janet did not observe at once that her chair was not being borne directly towards the Lawn Market. Being jolted as a chairman stumbled on a stone, she glanced out, to find herself among tombs, for the chairmen had turned in at the yett of Greyfriars Kirkyard, passing through which they might gain the Grass Market and then the Lawn Market, though it was the longer way, and less frequented. Ere she could ask why they took that gate, a band of men dashed upon her chair and upset it, to send Janet sprawling among the graves. Her chairmen fled into the dark, and the wee maid was bundled off squalling. Scrambling to her feet, Janet found herself captive to 6 or 7 men, some armed, all young, their faces blackened. One laughed low and tore her kirtle clean off her body, and him she knew through his disguise, though he spoke no word. Lord Banford. Many hands were laid upon her, and one clapped over her mouth. Twist and kick though Janet did, in a few moments they had stripped her bare as any new bairn. Banford showed her a dog whip that he drew from his belt. Then, flinging her asprawl among the tombstones, he lashed her backsides. She shrieked like a wounded leopardess in her agony and her shame, but the hour was late, and rough sport of common occurrence in kirkyards. When she struggled up, men pulled her down upon her back. Then it seemed worse was to be done for her, for Banford made ready to bestride her, as if he would construpate the lass while his friends looked on. Thus would her pride have a final fall. As Providence would have it, at that fell moment there passed through the wide kirkyard, coming down from the grass market, a party of strollers. At their head was Colonel Inchburn, unarmed, as was his custom in the town, and beside him the professor of Hebrew at the university, they too hotly disputing over apparitions, co-walkers, purgatory, fixed fate, foreknowledge, and other grave concerns. At the laird's heels followed a tall sepoy manservant, bearing a muckle staff like to a baton. Behind the blackamoor came two half-pay officers, captain and lieutenant of foot, sharing the colonel's draughty quarters in the cowgate. Janet, in her humiliation, did not make out the others, but the Barbary ape's stalwart bulk she did discern. Inchburn of Drumcarrow and his companions drew near at hand. Taking the stramash among the tombs for some squalid brawl of a bully and his trull, Colonel Inchburn turned to pass by on the other side. "At night, in Greyfriars Kirkyard," mutters he to the professor of Hebrew, "nil admirari." Her peril notwithstanding, Janet Kenley had kept her wits about her, though not her garments. "Drumcarrow!" Janet cries shrill, using the name of his estate to catch his ear, and speaking the broad accents of Fife to the same end. "Drumcarrow!" Janet shrieks. "Will you no help a neighbour?" Breaking free from the hands upon her, she springs up erect. Of ear and eye, no man was keener than Ian Inchburn. At a glance he makes out Janet, naught of her being hid. "Wow!" calls out Drumcarrow, and "wow!" echoes him the professor of Hebrew. Celerity of decision it was that had given Colonel Inchburn his Indian victories. "Your servant, madam!" cries the Barbary ape. To the blackamoor Colonel Inchburn flings his rusty cloak, and from him snatches the muckle staff. So armed he dashes upon the disguised Lord Banford, standing surprised behind his prey. In the dark, the combatants cannot see one the other's face. Banford gives the ape a stroke of the dog whip upon his left cheek. Then the Barbary ape, not to be withstood, tumbles Banford and belabours him unkindly with the staff. In Banford's party, whinges and dirks are drawn, 3 or 4 of Banford's friends setting upon the raging ape, yet the nimble ape beats them off, one and all, with his terrible staff, and the captain, the lieutenant, and the sepoy reinforcing Drumcarrow. Banford's minions take to their heels. The bleeding Banford, 2 teeth stricken out, essays to flee in their company, but the ape thumps him down again. Then up trot the town guard with their Lochaber axes, summoned by some citizen in the cottages against the kirkyard wall. Colonel Inchburn is well known to the veterans of the guard, having bestowed upon them many a pot of ale. "Friends," says Drumcarrow to the guard, "take in charge this broken bravo, and lodge the ruffian in the toll booth." Meanwhile the sepoy has enveloped poor Janet in Drumcarrow's old cloak, and the professor of Hebrew has called in another sedan chair from Candlemaker's Row, and the wee maid has been discovered shivering behind a minister's tomb. Janet is borne away to the lawn market, bloody, bruised, and falling into a swoon. The sergeant of the guard is fixing manacles upon the felon Banford, who has been rolled in the mud, battered in the face, and thumped without mercy by the muckle staff in the ape's muckle hands. "Unhand me, loons!" gasps he, "for I am Lord Banford." Drumcarrow laughs loud in his face. "This lump of filth an English lord," says Drumcarrow to the sergeant. "Aye, put him down as an impostor forbye, sergeant." To the toll booth's cage Lord Banford is dragged, and he passes some wretched hours therein, ere Sir Angus Kinkle persuades the provost that this groaning hulk indeed is a peer's son. Of the following page of the manuscript, only some words and phrases are plain. In substance, it tells how Janet's aunt and brother comforted her, and how Colonel Inchburn, Scots Samaritan, was left with the weal from Banford's whip on his cheek. One gathers that Janet refuses to proceed against Banford, dreading more public shame. Out of delicacy of sentiment, it appears, Drumcarrow refrains from calling upon Miss Kenley, though she has his cloak. When the manuscript becomes sufficiently legible once more, one encounters a second report of a conversation between Lord Banford and Sir Angus Kinkle, Ed. Further, Sir Angus Kinkle made deposition to the magistrates that he apprehended imperfectly the drift of Lord Banford's discourse, else he would have dissuaded him from his purpose and sought some act of interdict to restrain him. It was thus that they had talked together 3 days after Lord Banford's discharge from the toll booth. Sir Angus: My lord, having been drubbed first by a half-witted lad, and second by an ancient pistol with sinews like unto an ape's, all for the sake of leaving a stripe or two upon a maiden's bum, ye'd be well advised to withdraw to Cumberland for the time, before some third Scot extracts the remainder of your teeth. For if ye fear your father's wrath, take ship to the continent for 3 months, a safe remove from Pittenweem enchantments. Lord Banford: To hell with your coward devices, Kinkle. You will have the goodness, gout or no gout, to carry my challenge to Inchburn. Do ye tire of life, lad, young though ye are? Think what he did to you with a stick as to some schoolboy. What would he have done to you with a sword? I was acquainted with Drumcarrow at Calcutta, though, I ne'er cared for the canting Dominie Colonel. Mind ye, he ne'er lost a battle nor a duel. Think on those ape-long arms of his, he'd spit thee like a suckling pig. They say he's made his bargain with some Indian devil, taking not gold in exchange for his soul, but martial triumph. Ye've been tutored by a French fencing master, aye. What's that to Drumcarrow? No, Banford. Standing in loco parentis to thee, I'd send ye back to the rats of the toll booth, rather than have ye carved by the ape. Faith, Kinkle, I confess you do dissuade me. Yet what of this? There's many a dark wind in this town. Ye fancy we're in Venice with bravos for hire. Mind the ragged regiment that Drumcarrow keeps about him in the Cowgate. They and their patron would make mince pies of any smilers with a knife. More ye rascal, I'll tolerate no dastard ambuscade, though I've pardoned many a scrape of thine. I'd bear witness against ye mysel as a gentleman and one that has borne the king's commission. Go to, old Bobadil. I'll spare the ape, he's beneath me. Yet I know how to make the Janet witch repent, weeping her black eyes out. What mean ye? Forget the bonny jut of the Kenley's bum. The watch will watch ye henceforth, and Drumcarrow has set a sepoy to dog her chair, friends tell me, when the jade begins to venture out again. Would ye relish another night in the toll booth, and worse than that? Why, I think our Pittenweem enchantress has addled your wits. I'm none of the unco good lad, but I say to ye, stick to drinking and wenching, putting out of your head flogging and stabbing. Your lordship must confine yourself to the genial vices. Here again the manuscript is illegible. A full 2 pages, not only damp damaged, but in part crossed and hatched out, perhaps by the author. When the narrative resumes, it's set down in a hand spidery, hasty, and often scrawled, as if written in recollected passion. Editor. Dugald came not home to the lawn market that night. In dread, she sent a caddy with word of this to Drumcarrow, who dispatched back to her a letter sprinkled with Latin tags, in substance saying that a young man consorting with bad companions soon or late takes to all the pleasures of the flesh, and that like enough Dugald, if she would forgive the phrase, had bedded with some wench in Leith, and would return a sadder and a wiser man. He presented his compliments, adding that he would call for his cloak when assured that Miss Kenley had recovered her composure. Another night passed, and Dugald came not. Then was Janet Kenley distraught. Once she fancied she glimpsed her brother peering out from the pantry, but, flinging open the door, found no man. Thrice she heard his tread upon the common stair, and scampered down to meet him, yet encountered only empty air. Again, from the corner of her eye, she beheld his form seated in a chair, gazing upon her. She sprang towards him, but clasped nothing. Hope ebbing, she did then, what must put her soul in jeopardy. Those things her mother had taught her in secret she recollected well, though never before had she practised them. Into a trance she cast herself, invoking the power of second sight. In vision, verily, she beheld her brother, where he lay. For some hours thereafter was she senseless. Rising at length, she looked into the book of the learned divine Robert Kirk, whom the subterraneans carried off for his knowing over much of them, and into certain writings at the bottom of a chest that her mother had bequeathed to her. Not every man or woman has a co-walker, but they only who are fey in some degree, and even of the fey, not all. Yet Janet long had sensed beyond the senses that sometimes there walked an image or echo of her brother Dugald, a simulacrum, mayhap the missing half of the terrestrial Dugald. Steeling herself, Janet Kenley then did what must be done to raise the co-walker or Reflex-Man, and to send it on its way. For the living Dugald she would not see again here below. The Reflex-Man must serve her turn. At this point in the manuscript, ink appears to have been spilled or poured upon some few pages. Close examination discloses that on these pages probably were set down spells of formulas. When these blotted pages are submitted to recent specialized technologies, conceivably it may be possible to decipher this writing, seemingly in dog Latin. The page following the formulas is headed by a verse from Job below, after which the narration shifts to Whinnymuir Close, editor. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. Among his serving men at Whinnymuir House, Lord Banford kept one Tam Alloway, ill-visaged and sly, said to have been a pirate in the West Indies. This Alloway served his master as pander and ruffler. Together with 4 other servants, Alloway was lounging by the house door after nightfall, when the porter at the pen of the close cries out sharp, "Stand! Stand ye!" Thereupon, his challenge being unheeded, the porter runs incontinent from the pen towards his fellows, his face ashen, wailing as he runs. Then comes into the close one that shimmers as he strides towards the house. In his right hand the shape holds a naked sword. Though the clothes upon him are fine with silver lace, they are all besmirched and bespattered. This shape is tall and broad of shoulder and grim of countenance. As it comes upon them, the serving men about the doorway gasp and shake, and the porter goes down upon his knees. Now the boldest of Banford's men, Tam Alloway, sets himself in the path of this shimmering one with the drawn sword. "What would ye?" begins Alloway. Then the shape stares him full in the face. "Oh God!" cries Alloway. "Dougal Kenley, you're dirked and sunk!" This Alloway tumbles down in a fit, kicking and frothing upon the stones, a thing mindless. Speaking no word, the shimmering shape passes through the doorway into Whinnymuir House without let or hindrance, the men shrinking together with a grue, none venturing to withstand the intruder. He mounts the stair within, and as he goes up, 1 or 2 of the serving men perceive that in the back of his fine coat is a sore rent, with stains all about it. It is nigh to midnight. Lord Banford has been with a woman in the Canongate, but just now returns to his house, finding no porter at the pen, and Alloway writhing like a stricken serpent at his house's threshold. "What's this riot?" says Banford, thick of speech from overmuch brandy. He glares upon his men's pallid faces. The understeward answers him, "My lord, 'tis Master Dougal Kenley has gone up the stair with his hanger in his hand and mud upon his clothes." Lord Banford shakes as if an ague were upon him, and he strikes the understeward upon the face with his gloved hand. "You lie!" cries Banford. "Confess to me that you lie. Who's paid you for this lie?" "No, no, my lord," say the other serving men. That daft Dougal, or else his twin brother, passed us by and went up the stair, and he was all besmirched with a rent in his back. Banford curses them for fools and cravens, but leans, most pallid, against the wall. Then, "'Twas Tam Alloway lied to me," says he, and kicks Alloway, where he lies writhing. "Alloway? Tam Alloway?" roars Lord Banford. "Say that Dougal lives, and that you lied to me, man." Yet Alloway does no more than gabble like some bird. Banford turns upon his serving men, saying, "Get you in the house and take him, or cut him down, he being a mere man." Yet the under-steward, with blood upon his lips where his master has struck him, says softly, bowing, "Lead on, my lord." Lord Banford toys with his sword hilt, yet does not stir, as one lost in horrid thought. Of a sudden he commands the under-steward, "Nay, run and fetch me Colonel Inchburn of Drumcarrow." "Drumcarrow, my lord?" asks the under-steward, not believing his ears. "Speak him soft, man," says Banford, his breath coming hard, and as if to himself. "They say the apes made his pact with the devil, and the devil protects his own, and Dougal was the ape's friend. None but damned Drumcarrow might coax the tyke out." The porter sings out shrill, "Some face at the window," pointing to the third story of the house. "What face? What face?" screeches Lord Banford. But it is gone. "The young witch has sent the thing," Banford says low, "conjuring it out from hell or the loch." Then, more loud, "I, man, run to Drumcarrow in the Cowgate, speaking him fair. Say that Lord Banford craves his mercy, being in dire need, and will repay his kindness in whatsoever form Colonel Inchburn of Drumcarrow desires." So while Banford and his men linger craven at the stair-foot, the under-steward hies him to the Cowgate with all expedition. By chance, Drumcarrow is alone in his lodging, save for a pensioned major with one leg and an old maidservant. The under-steward stammers out his message. "What, Lord Banford begging my service?" says Drumcarrow. Then he bethinks him. Poor Dougal, and he have wandered into Whinnymuir house, stands imperilled in that viper's den. Aye, we must have him out of there. Where has the lad been these 2 nights? "Go not alone to an enemy, Colonel Inchburn," says to him the one-legged major. "Needs must, lest they dirk the lad," Drumcarrow answers. He glances about for some weapon. Hanging on the wall is a jewelled sword with a hilt of carved ivory that a Rani had bestowed upon Colonel Inchburn when he commanded her horse. He snatches the court tulwar from the wall and runs, the under-steward at his heels, the short distance to Whinnymuir Close. There stands Banford at the door, sword in hand. "Colonel Inchburn," says he, "letting bygones be bygones, will you come with me and take this Dougal out of my house? For doubtless he means me a mischief." "And you mean no mischief to him?" Drumcarrow asks. "And you swear, my lord, to fetch him out whole and scatheless. I'll adventure with you." At that, Banford's words stick in his craw, but presently he gasps out, "If he go, I'll touch him not." Then Drumcarrow and Banford ascend the stair, Drumcarrow leading, for Banford hung back to let him pass. Whinnymuir House, ere by chance or providence it was burnt in late years, was within like unto a Cretan labyrinth, being of much age and added to within and without at divers times. A candlestick in his left hand, Drumcarrow makes his way along the narrow passage, calling out, "Dougal! Dougal Kenley! Dougal lad! 'Tis Drumcarrow come to take you to your sister." Looking behind him presently, he finds that Banford is not at his back, having taken another turn somewhere in the house maze. Drumcarrow gropes on alone, turning a corner. He draws in his breath. For some paces distant, he sees a shimmering shape, man-high, fronting him. The face he cannot discern. "Dougal," says Drumcarrow, "if that be you, come to me, lad." Yet the shape recedes and vanishes, perhaps into a chamber. Drumcarrow presses on, though tempted to turn tail. Of a sudden, there comes from behind him an eldritch scream, so loud and wild that the candlestick falls from Drumcarrow's left hand, and he is left in blackness. There follows the sound of running feet, Drumcarrow turning round to confront whatever rushes upon him, his court-sword in his right hand. In that darkness, a shrieking thing hurls itself against Drumcarrow. He is flung against the wall in the straight place, and one hacks at him with a whinger, taking clean off the wee finger of Drumcarrow's left hand. Drumcarrow thrusts against his adversary like bull or ape, his blood up. With his Indian tulwar he runs the thing through, and it yet standing against the passage wall, wailing fearsomely. Drumcarrow runs it through again, and it falls, and is still. Blood from his left hand pouring out fast, Drumcarrow feels about the floor for his candle, most coolly takes out flint and steel, and lights it again, peers into the dead face at his feet. It is the face of Lord Banford, much contorted. Here's a pickle. Drumcarrow tears a bit of linen from the dead man's shirt to bind up his hand. He wipes his sword on Banford's coat and sheathes it. Looking about him, "Dugald," he calls 5 times, yet no answer comes. Dugald was not in this house, thinks Drumcarrow, not this night. The shimmering one was not canny. Good Lord deliver us. So Drumcarrow goes backward down the stair and finds the craven serving men still clustered round the doorway. Having heard the shrieks within, they shake, every man of them. "Look to your master," says Drumcarrow to them, but no more. They stand out of his way, and he makes straight for the provost's lodging, though all over blood, to tell of Lord Banford's strange end. The sooner and more fully told, the less the odds for a hanging. 2 days later, fishers in the Nor Loch come upon the corpse of Dugald Kinley, stabbed in the back and weighted down with lead. When Tam Alloway gibbering was searched in the toll booth, there was found in his pocket a gold locket that had been Dugald's, with the miniature portrait of Janet Kenley therein. Alloway they hanged in the Grassmarket. When they had put him to the question in the toll booth, he had said he had done the stabbing at his master's command, but Alloway had gone mad, so that his evidence was tainted, and, beside, Lord Banford was dead, and gone to his reward. There follow in the manuscript 3 pages of prayers, evidently copies from a prayer book, also copied comminations. These are omitted from this published version. The manuscript passes over what difficulties Colonel Inchburn may have encountered with Scottish authorities in consequence of the slaying. From another source, it is known that Colonel Inchburn of Drumcarrow enjoyed the intimacy of the Procurator Fiscal, who indeed was cousin to Drumcarrow. That friendship may have been of assistance to the redoubtable colonel. The narrative is resumed several days later, it appears, after Janet Kenley had given up her Lawn Market lodgings and returned to her house on the square at Pittenweem. Some scrawled sheets of accounts inserted in the manuscript at this point suggest that Janet found herself nearly bankrupt after her brother's extravagance and her own at Edinburgh. Editor. Having had her brother's coffin brought over the firth from Leith to Pittenweem, Janet Kenley buried Dugald by the massy tower of Pittenweem Kirk, and upon his stone was graven, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." "It might be well," said she to dying auntie, "to have Janet Kenley's stone graven too, for she felt not long for this world. Yet upon Janet's stone it would be impudence to grave a beatitude. She dwelt deep in the valley of humiliation, weeping long for Dugald and for herself. Her fine gowns she bestowed on Pittenweem lasses, attiring herself in black only. Her shoes too she gave to the poor, going about the house with naked feet, as becoming a clockmaker's daughter. She had done with rouge and the beauty patch. Words of her disgrace had made its way to Pittenweem, therefore she scarce left the house on the square, lest the fisher lads mock her. Their money was spent, nearly all. She had drawn the last of her siller from the Royal Bank of Scotland. When Auntie should die, the house must be sold or let, and Janet must go into service, if any mistress would take a maidservant called a wanton and a witch. One debt there remained to pay, that to the valiant Laird of Drumcarrow. His cloak she had with her in Pittenweem. She had washed it well, and now she embellished it with silver lace, for Colonel Inchburn had written to her in the Lawn Market that he would come for it. He had served her twice, still better the second time than the first. On a bright afternoon, a fisherman came up from the harbour to hand her a letter sent from the Cowgate by Drumcarrow, saying that if Miss Kenley was not otherwise engaged, he would call on the Friday for his cloak. He would be on his way inland to Drumcarrow Tower, the Colonel added, where masons and slaters were setting the Ducot to rights and pointing the tower, for he meant to dwell there as a laird should. It should be his Sabine farm for his declining years. He expressed his hope that her anguish might have abated somewhat. There was no word of his as to what had passed in the Whinnymuir house. She dared not wait on Pittenweem Pier that Friday, but sat with her hands in her lap that morning and much of the afternoon in her chamber on the upper floor, which served as her parlour and bedroom. As the bonny tall clock struck 4, somebody tirled at the pin on the High Street door, and peering down undetected, she beheld Drumcarrow. His sepoy stood sentry on the opposite side of the square. It was an altered Drumcarrow, for he wore a saffron cloak of some gorgeous Indian stuff, and a new beaver upon his head, and at his hip swung a court sword in a scabbard with silver mountings. His nose is noble, thought she, and his mouth and chin. Never mind the missing right ear, and now the missing wee finger of the left hand. Never mind least of all the whip welt taken for her on his cheek. See the valiant soldier's breadth of shoulder and depth of chest. Knowing she would not look upon Ian Inchburn, her saviour, after this hour, she strove to fix his image in her mind, so that it might linger there to her dying day. An ape indeed. Nay, Drumcarrow is a kingly lion, the Scots lion. A shy maid has shown him in, and now his boots clatter on the stair. She composes herself, Janet does, as best she may. She must not greet in his presence, nor haver. For all his civility, Inchburn of Drumcarrow will not linger long with such as she. Colonel Inchburn enters, sweeping off his beaver, bows somewhat stiffly. Surprising her, he takes her hand to kiss it lightly, as if he had been Paris bred. "Your servant, madam," says Drumcarrow. That salutation brought to her mind his same words when he had rescued her at Greyfriars. "Laird, does the cut on your cheek heal well?" "Tolerably well, madam," answers he, "and yours?" Janet went scarlet in shame. Then did Drumcarrow's face flush as well, so that she knew he had meant no innuendo by his words, but had spoken innocently enough. His blunder seemed now to tie his tongue. She motioned him to her best chair, but he paced instead to the window that looked from the gable towards the Kirk tower. He's eager to be gone, thought she. Taking the garment from a table, she says, "Laird, I have made ready your cloak for you, but now you require it not, for you wear some Rajah's robe." He took the old black cloak into his hands. "Why, madam," he tells her, "this is brave work your fingers have done upon it. No, I'm grateful. I'll give the Indian thing to my sepoy, and wrap myself in what has wrapped you also." Here again her colour flamed up, and next his as well. "Nay, madam, forgive me," he says, after a stillness in the chamber, "for I am no squire of dames, and my rude tongue betrays my folly. I meant naught amiss." "Why," says she to herself, "the laird is ill at ease. Something he means to say that must pain me. He cannot bring out his words." "Now, in that tower," Drumcarrow says, nodding towards the Kirk at the other end of the High Street, "time was when the Kirk session kept accused witches in a little room and questioned them." "I know it too well," she answers, with fear in her heart. Drumcarrow, Let me question them, madam. In a passage at Whinnymuir House, before my finger was taken off, I seemed to see a shimmering shape, and I called it by your brother's name. I'll be blunt, madam. Was it true what Banford's men said, that the ghost of your brother entered into the house? Janet. Nay, not Dougal's ghost, laird, but his semblance. The thing was a Reflex-Man. He came a meaning. Weel enough, madam, such shapes walk in India also. And yet, laird, in some sense, it may have been Dougal's spirit, for but half of him ever was in this world, and mayhap the other half lingering, affrighted Lord Banford's men. Aye, and sent Banford mad beside, so that he flew upon me and made me his executioner. Like enough the things caught him at some turning and peered into his face as it looked into Alloway's. Sent you that Reflex-Man, madam, and saw you it. Laird, I sent it, but ne'er beheld it. And did some power out of you, lass, send me from the Cowgate at Whinnymuir Close, for as I buckled on this sword that night, the vision of your fair face came into my mind, and hastened my steps. No, laird, I ne'er would have sent you to confront that shape in that house, for already I owed you more than mortal woman may pay. That sword, is it at your side now? Drumcarrow drew the sharp, pretty thing. Its ivory hilt was carved as a leopard's head, with rubies for eyes, a weapon of great price. The blade was a trifle bent from pinning Banford like some butterfly to the wall. Taking the keen tulwar into her hands, she kissed its blade most ardently with her red lips. Drumcarrow. Well done. You're a brave lass, Janet Kenley. Aye, that blade even Dougal's score with Banford. Janet. Knightly laird, I pray for Banford's damnation. Drumcarrow. Och, Janet, lass, ye lay waste your time. Such a one's hell-bent by nature. Purgatory's not for him. On purgatory I hold against our Scots doctors of divinity, but lass, I'll weary you. More of doctrine another day. Janet. They say, Ian Inchburn, that a Reflex-Man goes at last to his own herd. Below. Drumcarrow. Below. Then what of Dougal? Above, Janet, above. He was a little child, and of such is the kingdom. The semblance sinks, the soul rises. Corruption shall put on incorruption, and we shall be changed, lass, in the twinkling of an eye. Now, to her shame, the tears ran freely down her cheeks. She seated herself, for she could not stand longer. On a table lay a neat embroidered purse, her handiwork, and her last gift to Drumcarrow, as the restored and embellished cloak had been her first. She put the purse into his hands, saying, Drumcarrow, my brother and I give you this for token of our gratitude unto you. Your needlework, Janet Kenley? Asks Drumcarrow. Gladly I'll keep it by me, but what's this within? He jingles the purse in his broad palm and scowls fearsomely, so that Janet quivers in her chair. The day being warm, the window by Janet stands open. Out that window, Drumcarrow tosses the purse, and Janet hears it clink upon the paving of the close. D'ye take me for some Venice bravo, lass, cries Drumcarrow. Man of blood I may be, but on the field of honour I tak no pay for stabbing damned men in black passages. She is sobbing hard now. Laird, she tells him, it is all the siller left to me, the last bawbee. Tomorrow Auntie and I must sell my father's plenishings, even this tall clock, the last he made. And I'd heard tell that you'd returned from India with empty pockets, and my brother and I loved you, and I thought... Colonel Inchburn goes down on his knees beside her chair and takes her hand. Janet, says he, Janet, my bonny dear, I'm no so poor as some be. With that, he draws from a pocket a wee leathern bag and empties its contents into Janet's lap. 70 precious gems and more, some of them great ones. Not being yet wholly purged of the vanities of this world, she runs her fingers through them. Janet, in wonder, how came you by these, laird? Drumcarrow, not by sack or theft, but as a gift from my Rani. And Why gave she them to you, Ian Inchburn? For that I laid her enemies in heaps, lass. My Rannie had seen more than 80 withering summers. You must not carry them about like cairngorms, Drumcarrow. Put them in a strong box in the Royal Bank of Scotland. Nay, put them there yourself, Janet, an you like. The baubles are yours, lass, adorn your loveliness. She went first crimson and then white, ghost white. Yet the soldier deserved his reward after what he had done. In justice, she could deny him nothing. If he would make her his light of love, why, her pride had gone before her fall. If a leman he would take, she would give him who had slain Lord Banford what pleasure she might. He would keep her in Edinburgh, like enough, secure at least from the taunts and the stones of fisher-folk. She cast down her eyes, saying to him, Laird, there's no need to buy me. Tak back your stones, for I submit without them. Drumcarrow, what's this, Janet? Ye ken, lass, the Barbary ape, poor fool, asks your hand in wedlock, poor fool, because you are young and he is old. You beautiful, he hideous. Yet there's this, Janet Kenley, the ape does not fear you, while another man might come to shiver at your gifts. If we are wed, there must be no more raisings and sendings, nay, even no simples, Janet. Now do you scorn me? The gems fell from her lap to the floor. Neither heeded them. He had clasped her about her knees and was now speechless, as he feared she was about to pronounce his doom. She ran her fingers through his unruly red hair, lifted his head, fixed him with her black eyes, and kissed the ape. Then Janet wept harder than before, knowing her unworthiness, marvelling that Drumcarrow did not abominate her, and fearing still her soul's damnation. And she swore to her betrothed that she would call nothing from the vasty deep. As they were picking up the jewels from the floor some time later, Janet whispered to him of her mother's and her grandmother's powers of second sight, that they had hidden under a bushel, as she must hide hers. Then, hand in hand, they ran down the stair cannily to retrieve the purse tossed into the close. At this point are inserted into the manuscript several pages of drawings executed with some skill of the extensive additions to Drumcarrow Tower commenced about 1740. It is possible, though not certain, that some pages of the narrative are missing. At any rate, we are given no account of the events of nearly a decade. The concluding pages of the extant manuscript, written conjecturably not long after 1784, when most of the forfeited Jacobite estates were restored to the descendants of proprietors out in the 45, touch upon events during 1744, 1745, and 1746. Editor. Much to his satisfaction, and even more to hers, Janet had borne to Colonel Inchburn 4 sons and 1 daughter. The sons inherited their father's valour and strength, the daughter her mother's eyes and ankles, yet not her mother's secret talents. He had sought Janet's hand somewhat abruptly, Drumcarrow told his wife during the first year of their marriage, as much for her fortitude as for her beauty. He had foreseen that she would make a Roman mother. As for her charms, having viewed those extensively in Greyfriars Kirkyard, he could not put them out of his head, for all the austere celibate life he had led. That enchantment, Laird, was unintended, says Janet to him. To the pledge she had made to him at their betrothal, that she would raise no semblances nor send them to do her bidding, Janet was faithful, so long as her husband lived. Yet, in the fatal year of 1746, she imperilled her soul once more. During 1744, Drumcarrow's sight commenced to fail him, and he suffered from time to time pangs about his heart. Janet, says he, you and the bairns are well provided for by our East India Company stocks. I would not linger a blind, hurpled creature to burden you. His wife, clinging to him, implored Drumcarrow to abide with her so long as the Lord left breath in his body. Yet when the claimant landed in the west, Drumcarrow resolved to aid the prince's cause with his sword, in despite of the years that lay upon him. To her he repeated the lines of Lovelace, I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more. Having embraced her ardently for the last time, Colonel Inchburn rode off alone to join his Jacobite friend, the Earl of Balmerino, in whose horse guards he served without commission. Wise in war, Drumcarrow entertained scant hope of victory for the prince. He therefore prudently entered upon the muster roll of another name than his own when he joined Lord Balmerino by the Market Cross in Cooper. Under that chosen name, Donald Achtermuchty, he rode throughout the course of the rising. By the name the prince's army had withdrawn to Inverness, Drumcarrow was one of the few in Balmerino's broken troop who still possessed a good horse. On the 16th day of April, 1746, the second sight came upon Janet Inchburn once more, about 2 of the afternoon. Giddy, she sank upon the floor, and there beheld in her mind's eye a broad moor, and upon it a furious battle. Up galloped some 20 Jacobite horse to fall upon a cloud of red dragoons. Foremost among the prince's troopers was an old man with grey hair leaning over the neck of his horse. The saddles about him were emptied by shot or sabre, yet he rode on, slashing the dragoons, as if invisibly protected. Clean through the dragoons he burst, and then, when he might have dashed away scatheless, he wheeled to charge the enemy solitary. Soon a ball struck him. Flinging up his long arms, he toppled from the saddle, and the dragoons rode over him, hacking at his head. Some few days later, full report of the defeat at Culloden Moor was brought to Mrs. Inchburn of Drumcarrow. She did not cry out, for at the very day and hour of the battle she had known of her husband's death. There had been found on the field, a yard or 2 from Lord Strathallan's corpse, the crushed body of an old man trampled upon by Cobham's dragoons. The face was ruined beyond recognition. In the trooper's pockets were the papers that gave his name as Donald Achtermuchty. What with the long arms of the corpse that lacked a face, it was said to the Duke of Cumberland by 1 or 2 officers that the old dead trooper might be Drumcarrow, the Barbary ape. Moreover, the one called Achtermuchty had been gallant and fearless as Drumcarrow. Yet it was not proven that Inchburn of Drumcarrow had been at Culloden, nor that, supposing him there, he had fought for the Pretender. As for the old man's corpse, it was flung into a pit, with those of many other Jacobite fallen. Ian Inchburn was not seen again by any man, and his eldest son, Roy, succeeded him at Drumcarrow. Some attempt was made to have the estate forfeited to the crown, yet the heirs men of law baffled that endeavour. Wise in his last hour, as throughout his earthly life, the Barbary ape had preserved the lands for his posterity. Had he been taken living or recognised dead, the lands of Drumcarrow would have fallen forfeit until this year at best. No man saw Colonel Inchburn after Culloden, yet I, the witch, saw him. Not Reflex-Men only did my mother teach me to summon up. As the woman of Endor raised Samuel, so out of my passion I conjured my Ian. Be he above or with the herd below, or in the purgatory of which he had talked, I must look upon him once more. It might be that I would behold but a broken cadaver on Culloden Moor, even as I had seen my dear stab Dougal beneath the Nor Loch before I worked my vengeance upon Banford. Yet such knowledge would be better than weary ignorance. The conjugation went otherwise. For one moment Ian Inchburn stood before me. From out of his glorified body shone his goodness and his generosity. He had been raised in incorruption. He it was, though transfigured. He had been purged of dross and defect, and yet he was Ian Inchburn, loved by his witch wife. This visible flesh, says Augustine, we must without doubting believe will rise again. I learnt the truth of that. Mightily I dreaded my husband's wrath for summoning against his command. Though he spoke not, he smiled, and then winked at me, and was gone. He was no semblance, no simulacrum, no reflex-man, but Ian Inchburn, quick beyond time's confines. Now I do entreat the Almighty's forgiveness for my saucy floating of my Ian's command, and for exercising that last time those arts forbidden. Adjuvante Deo resurgam. I have sinned, O Lord, but let my cry come unto thee. Let me with Ian be forever not semblance, but substance. I have survived the hero these 40 years. Now let thy faithless servant depart in peace, awaiting the last trump. I have put away my vanity. Let him who reads this do likewise. When thou from hence away art past, every nicht an alla, the Whinnymuir thou comest at last, and Christ receive thy soul.
If you like that story, consider supporting me as a patron. That way you help me make more stories for you and get access to a patrons-only library of stories. Lots more hours for you to listen to.
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
So that was The Reflex-Man by Russell Kirk from his book Ancestral Shadows, an anthology of ghostly tales. I've done 2 previous Russell Kirk ones, Saviour Gate, which is a Christmas story, and the other one was Behind the Stumps, which is set in New England. Russell Kirk was an American, but of Scottish ancestry, and you can tell that. Probably. And he studied in Scotland. He was born 1918, died 1994. Was an eminent literary and social critic who rose to national prominence in 1953 with the publication of his book *The Conservative Mind*. He's been a big influence on conservative thought, particularly in the US. The founding editor of Modern Age and the University Bookman, he wrote more than 30 books, including his memoirs, *The Sword of Imagination*. The Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal in Mecosta, Michigan, continues his... I think he's from Michigan, actually, or he lived in Michigan, continues his work, hosting seminars, writers and research scholars at Piety Hill, Kirk's ancestral home. There you go. In eerie tales, a writer, if he has sufficient perception, may take us close to the essence of evil by symbols, images and metaphors from the imagination. Try Kirk as a fantasist. Unless you're allergic to the genre, you'll have a good time. And Edmund Fuller said that in the Wall Street Journal. So I got this sent to me. This book, copy of the book I got used to be in the John Gray Park 28 Library at Kent School, Kent in Connecticut. Blimey. There's a bit more to say about him. Widely regarded as a founder of the modern conservative movement, Russell Kirk was a noted man of letters whose prodigious literary output included a syndicated newspaper column, a regular page in National Review, and many books. This volume demonstrates another compelling side of Kirk, the imaginative author who could communicate his powerful vision using the dramatic genre of the ghost story. Ancestral Shadows collects 90, this is the book, of Kirk's best ghostly tales from the periodicals and anthologies published throughout his life. In the tradition of Defoe, Stevenson, Hawthorne, Coleridge, Poe, and other master writers, these frightful stories conjure the creaks and shadows of the very places where they came to life. Haunted St Andrews, the Isle of Egg, Kelly Castle, Balkerris House, Dury House, which has the most persistent of all country house spectres, and Kirk's own ancestral spooky house in Mecosta, Michigan. So there we are, and it was sponsored to you by my patron, Cosimo Medici, otherwise known as Gavin Critchley, who every month or so bungs me a big bunch of cash and says, do a story. And he says very generously, interestingly, now this opens the consideration for accents, and you know, I like doing them. Thing about this story wasn't it so great? I mean, the switch between the posh English and the Scots, and also if you notice, there's lots of obscure vocabulary. Not only the Scots vocabulary, but also things like Tulwar and Rani from the time in India, but not written in sort of Bengali, but written in the British English approximation of the words. So do you know what? It was so much of a piece, and the use of particularly Scottish phrases to situate it. And also, if you notice the dialogue, the tense, would flit between past tense and present tense Janet says in He Comes, and then past. And it was just, verbal firecrackers, really, and I really, really enjoyed doing it. So thanks to Gavin because he said to me, do a Scottish one. Gavin likes my accents, and many people do. Some people don't. Some people will no doubt complain about this, but kind of, all right, don't like it. You paid out for it. Go and listen to somebody else. Honest. But and he said he liked the Madame Crowell's Ghost, which I did in kind of probably a Northumbrian border accent, and that's how Le Fanu wrote it. And I did a Ramsey Campbell in a Scouse accent, and he liked both of those. And he said to me, do one in Scots. I've done Thrawn Janet. I've done some Scots stuff before. Now, Greyfriars Kirkyard. My father, before I was born, lived with his dad, my granddad. I tell you where it is. It's on Candlemaker Row, in fact. Well, sort of Candlemaker Row, Grassmarker. If you go out of the top of Greyfriars Kirkyard, and you'll go take the top exit past the Greyfriars Bobby statue, you could see his. I'm told, I wasn't there, but I've been told you could see that statue, the little dog, from their house, which was, there's a kind of a tongue of the Candlemaker Road comes up steep street, and there's a if you go to the top street that eventually leads to the Frankenstein pub, and I don't think that was there when my dad was there, but there's the Frankenstein pub there, and they lived just by there. So I think I should ancestrally. I was born in Carlisle, which is very close to Scotland, and I've seen Scotland all my life, and I'm genetically Scottish, but I was born in and Cumbrian as well, and so this man had land in Cumberland, and the Duke of Cumberland, but they weren't Cumberland men, They were just were thieving landlords who took the land from the ordinary people. There we are. I've just been reading a book called The Book of Trespass by this guy about the enclosures, so I'm all full of it. How the great and the good basically stole the common land from people by putting fences around it. And in Scotland, in the Highlands, particularly tragic with the Highland clearances. Yeah, but anyway, let's not get too political. So the accent. So I did my best. Okay, it's at least as good as my posh English. But you shall be the judges of that. Anyway, I'm not going to do too much of a ramble now. I just want to thank Gavin again, and because it's quite a long story, I say how much I enjoyed it, thanking him again, thanking you for listening, and I'm going to go and take the dogs out for the third time, because I lock them sometimes when they're not being naughty, they're just pups, but if I'm recording, I can't have them carrying on. I don't mind them doing it when I'm doing this, recording this kind of chatty bit, because just some dog growling and snoring doesn't really make any difference. But when I'm doing the story, I don't want them to do that. So they're downstairs in the kitchen behind their child gate, and I'll go down. They'll be all waggy tails, and how could you leave us? And they're like, I've only left you for an hour. Come on, and we're going to go out in the dark on this November night with my head torch, and they've got little red lights on their harnesses, and so they run off and I can see them twinkling, and then when they look towards me, they catch the beam of the head torch and with their eyes light up like monsters in the dark. But there we are. So that's all I've got to say. Russell Kirk, I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a greatly written story, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks, Gavin.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so? Isn't that so? Isn't that so?